Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. This is, of course, the Westport Museum's Tuesday Treasure program, where we go through some of the lesser seen objects in the museum's collection. Tonight, we are looking at some 1920s objects. My name, as always, is Nicole Carpenter. I'm the Programs and Collections Director here at the Westport Museum for History and Culture. As we start this program, as we start all of our programs, we would like to recognize the Pagussit people, who are the indigenous communities who made up this region. We'd also like to recognize that the museum and the town of Westport were built on and with these unceded indigenous homelands. We are pleased to offer this program to you free of charge this evening. We do, as always, appreciate any donation that you can make. We do have a $5 suggested donation for all of our free programs, but understand this is still a very difficult time. We encourage you to support the museum however you are able to. One way that you can do that with a non-monetary donation is by following and liking us on all of our social media handles. You will be notified of future programs just like this that are on our Facebook or YouTube platforms. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter at Westport History and on Instagram at Westport History Museum. This program this evening is a recorded program. All of our recorded and live programs are available on both Facebook and YouTube just by searching the name of the museum. If you have any questions or comments, I will not be able to answer them live this evening, but please do put them in the chats box and I or my staff will get to them as soon as we are able to after this video has aired. So as I mentioned, this evening we are going through some 1920s objects, kind of going through the flapper era, the roaring 20s. So one thing that I do want to let you all know is this evening we are looking at evening wear. We do have one hat, actually both of our hats are a bit more casual, but it is important to note that in the 1920s, clothing was meant to be worn at specific times of day. So you would have a work dress or a work suit, even travel clothes. But the pieces that we are looking at tonight are all evening pieces. These would have been worn to parties or to events in the evening time. Very extravagant pieces that we are looking at today. So the first item in the museum's collection is one of the accessories here on the table. This is a blue feather fan, and I will open it up for you just a bit. It has a tortoise shell handle, which you can see here. And the feathers, these beautiful blue feathers, are a mixture of ostrich and peacock. And if I flip this open for you, you'll be able to see how magnificent it really is. So it is quite a beautiful fan with all of these lovely dyed feathers. This was donated to the museum in 1974 by Mr. and Mrs. Irving Flitt, I believe. This is a woman's fan, of course. It may remind some of us as a performer's fan. This is definitely a very extravagant piece. This would have probably been used at very formal events or very large occasions. Think of like a Gatsby party. This fan is actually not from the 1920s. It's originally made in the 1880s. But it is important to note that even though something might be made or created, manufactured in an earlier period, many of these pieces are used later on, especially as they come back into fashion. So this is something that would have been very fashionable, very extravagant in the 1920s. And even though it was a bit of an older piece, it was 40 years old by the time that the 20s came around, it definitely would have been popular within that era. The next piece that I'd like to show you is actually donated to the museum in 1975, so just a year after this. And this was donated by Mrs. Edward T. Street. And it was actually purchased in 1927. So we know exactly when this dress was bought by its owner, and then also when it came to the museum. So this is a lovely black beaded waist dress. You can see part of it as on the table here, but it has a very straight silhouette. So when it lays along the body, there is no nipped waist, but it hangs in almost like a column, like silhouette. It has these wonderful sequins down the middle. If I hold it up here, you can see it a bit easier. It has sequins down the middle, and then it has these wonderful circles made out of beads, and it of course has this wonderful mesh overlay. This would have been worn over some other kind of shift or slip dress underneath, but this, I will tell you, is very see-through. It's also very heavy, extremely heavy from all of the beading. Down on the skirt, it does have a scalloped edge. You probably can't see that terribly well, but it does have also more detailing down there on the bottom. And all of this beading and sequin work makes this dress quite heavy. It's actually one of the reasons we don't have it on a mannequin this evening, because it is nearly 100 years old, but it is very, very delicate and it's in beautiful condition. So for the safety of this object, we have it laying down this evening, but it would have been extravagant on. The next piece that I'd like to show you is actually one of the two pieces of menswear that we have this evening, and that is this white vest. This is, again, a formal piece of clothing. On the back, it does have a lovely little buckle that would allow you to cinch in the waist and adjust. But on the front, the wonderful detail that we like are these beautiful buttons, as well as the stripe work down the front of the vest. Men typically would have been wearing tuxedos for some of these very formal events, as well as for more of a day look, they might be wearing those cream suits. If you think about any of the 1920s films you may have seen, they wear white pants and straw boaters like this. This vest probably would have been an evening vest, so very much for an extravagant party. This dress over here is another women's dress. This is probably a little bit later in the 20s. It's not quite as extravagant as some of our other beaded dresses, but it does, of course, feature these wonderful details along the side. And it does go all the way to the bottom of the hem where the green beads and some of this pattern work continues. And not only is it on the front left side of the dress, but it also extends onto the back for a bit as well. These lovely vines and flower work. This dress is also made of satin on the top, this black satin. And this was donated by Mrs. George Tolkien in 1978. A lot of donations in the 70s of these beautiful 20s dresses. The last dress that we'll show you tonight is this Seafoam green dress. This was donated in 2000, so almost 20 years ago, or just over 20 years ago. It was donated by Louisa Francoeur. And this, just as two of our other dresses, has just so much beadwork on the body of this dress. This is both on the front and the back of the dress, and it has these lovely layers. Now this has a little bit different of a shape than the dress we were looking at on the table. The dress on the table has that drop waist, so it's lower than the natural waist, whereas this is a bit more curved to the body and more fitted. But it is still very much in that style of a straighter silhouette. This piece is absolutely beautiful, and it does have, you can probably see it a little bit easier on the front of the dress here. Each one of these little loops is actually free hanging. So when this dress moves, all of the beads are moving along with it. Makes this lovely, lovely little cocktail dress that is fully beaded on both sides with this extravagant beadwork. The two hats that we have for you this evening, the first that I showed you with this straw boater, which we will get to in just a moment, But it is important to note that both men and women were wearing hats frequently in the 20s. Women were almost expected to be wearing a hat, to be very fashionable. And there were different types that were very popular during the 20s, including the cloche, which you'll see here. But it also included straw hats, which were both for men and women, slightly different styles, as well as turbans and berets were also popular, as well as some other types of hats in that period. But the straw hat that I mentioned before, this is a men's hat. Within the 20s, straw hats were more popular for men. Women did wear them, but towards the end of probably the second half of the 20s, it wasn't as popular for women. They were usually very delicately decorated. No feathers or ostrich or peacock or anything on these hats. They were usually very delicate with a simple ribbon or maybe a flower. But you can see in this piece, especially on the top, if I turn it a bit, that it has this really intricate pattern that's woven into the straw. And even though it's very, very simple hat at first glance, it's a very detailed and extravagant piece, even though it looks quite simple. And you can actually see along the rim that it is not just a flat brim, it is actually patterned as well with these diamonds. It makes a lovely little piece. Women's hats that were straw would have been a bit larger, more of a sun hat, but there were boaters like this that were also made for women. The last piece that we have for you is this pink cloche. And this was given to the museum very, very early on in the 70s. Now, this is a pink cloche, very, very tight to the head. Of course, it would have accented these very short hairstyles that the flappers in the 1820s women wore. This is made of cotton and felt, and it does have, again, just like the boater, it does have, if I turn this just a tad, a lovely ribbon detail with pink, a red, and a white. And this was something called a California sport hat. So we know the name cloche as a very broad term, but this is more specifically the type of hat that we see here. So those are all of the items that I have for you tonight. I hope you did enjoy this little taste of 1920s fashion. Of course, there are many, many styles. As I mentioned, there's clothing for every part of the day within the 1920s. And that is very true in America as well as the rest of the world until about the 1960s. So this is just a taste of what you would see in the 1920s. And if there is interest, do let me know. We can always dig out some of our more casual looks from the 1920s rather than these kind of extravagant evening looks. So thank you again so much for joining me. Please tune in again when we do our next Tuesday Treasure. Thank you so much.